Hey guys, it's Vicky, and today I'm here to share with you my July wrap-up, all the books that I read in the month of July. The first book that I completed this month was The Girls by Emma Cline, and this book I listened to on audio, and it's basically one of those books that is polarizing. People either like it or they don't like it, and I really liked it. It's a coming-of-age story about a girl named Evie who, and she is growing up in the late 60s. It takes place in 1969. And she meets this group of girls who are just kind of different and a little bit mysterious, and she kind of becomes just enthralled by them and what they're about. And she starts kind of hanging out with them and stuff and getting into their crowd. And they basically live in a commune type situation, very similar to the Manson family. It's like a fictionalized version of the Manson family. Overall, I think that it was a really good book. I thought the writing was really good. And I think I enjoyed it more because I listened to it. I know some people, a big complaint they had of the book was that the writing was, they didn't like it, that it was maybe too descriptive, maybe came off as a little pretentious, and I can totally see that because it is very wordy and descriptive. But I think because I was listening to it, I just really liked it. It was just really pleasing to the ear, and I enjoyed it very much. I think that overall it was a character-driven story. The plot was a little bit thin. I was expecting it to kind of build up to something more than it did, but the ending was a little bit on the underwhelming side. But overall, I think the characters were strong, and like I said, the writing was very strong. And I really liked how Emma Cline, I thought she did a really good job of kind of showing the dichotomy that existed in the 60s in America. You kind of had these two cultures that were often like clashing, because you had kind of the continuation of the 50s where everyone was clean cut and June Cleaver-ish, if you will, and then you had the subculture, you had the hippies who were very anti that, and they just lived this completely different life. And I always found that very fascinating about the 60s, that there was that going on where you had these two cultures that were different and often clashed. And I think that, like I said, Emma Cline did a good job of showing how that worked. Overall, I thought it was a really good book. I really liked it. I would definitely recommend it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. My next July read was Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and this is a poetry collection. And the first thing that I really did like about it was that it was broken up into 4 sections, and I can never remember what they're all called, so hold on. They're called The Hurting, The Loving, The Breaking, and The Healing. So I liked that it was broken up that way because it kind of made it, even though it's a poetry collection, it made it very linear and kind of told a story. Some of the poems were great, where I was like, ooh, you know, I kind of read them over again or whatever. And then some of them were just kind of meh for me. I think that if I had read this as a teenager, I would have loved it. Like, it would have been like my favorite book ever. Definitely, some of the poems definitely kind of took me back to that time period in my life. But I think being a little older, it maybe just didn't affect me as much as it would a younger person or a younger me. I think overall, I just wasn't as just like head over heels in love with this collection as some people. Some of the poems are very simple, almost too simple, and that was kind of what kind of, I guess, bothered me about it sometimes. But then at the same time, that simplicity was also sometimes what I found to be very strong about the poems. So, I don't know. I thought that it was a good collection. I didn't love it, and I didn't hate it. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished in the month of July was Wendys Buttonbacks by Stephen King and Richard Chizmar. This book is a novella about a young girl named Gwendy who is given this mysterious box, and the box has these little levers on it and these different colored buttons that you can push and different things will happen. So it's kind of magical, mysterious. And it's given to her by this mysterious man in black. And when he gives it to her, he's kind of vague about what it does exactly. But she takes it, and she has it for quite a few years. That was the one thing about this that I found kind of interesting and a little bit odd, was that it spans, I think, like 10 years or something. that she has this box, but I mean, it's like 10 years in this little tiny book. The book was interesting. It had a really interesting premise, but I think it fell flat just a little bit for me because there wasn't a whole lot of suspense. Definitely no horror or anything like scary about it at all. So in that regard, it was a little bit disappointing. I thought that the character of Wendy was a good character. I liked her. But it just kind of like, nothing really happened with her. And more importantly, I felt like the character of the Man in Black, though he's in it pretty briefly, if he's the Man in Black that, like, you know, all of us Stephen King readers know and love, he was very out of character. Yeah, overall, it was okay. Again, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I finished Into the Water by Paula Hawkins, and this was like an anticipated, I think, summer read for a lot of people because Paula Hawkins, her first book, The Girl on the Train, was a very big success. So I think a lot of people, myself included, I was looking forward to reading this one because I really enjoyed The Girl on the Train. So basically this book is about this woman is found dead in this river in this small town, and earlier in the year a teenage girl was also found dead in this river, and you kind of find out pretty quickly that quite a few women have died in this river, and this river is kind of a focal point in this little town. And so for the most part it is very much a mystery because you have the mystery of trying to find out what happened to this woman. Did she jump? Like, did she commit suicide, or was she murdered? And so that part was interesting. However, at first I had a really hard time getting into the book because there are a lot of characters, like so many characters. I think there were a dozen, I want to say, if I had to go back and count, I want to say there were a dozen. So it took me about 100 pages to really like get that sorted out so that I could then focus on the story. And then the story became, after that, did become very engaging, and I did start to really like sink in and enjoy the story. What I really liked about the book was that there were kind of 2 mysteries going on at once. You had the mystery of the girl, Nell, the woman, who had most recently died in the river, trying to figure out, was she murdered, did she commit suicide, you know, that whole mystery. And then you also had the mystery of Katie, the teenage girl who died in the river earlier in the year. Her death was ruled a suicide, but there was like a lot of mystery behind her suicide. I will say that though I enjoyed this book, it was definitely more of a slow burn than The Girl on the Train. It wasn't as intense. There definitely wasn't as much suspense for me. It was more about the characters in the story. In this, it was about all of these people and what they kind of had to do with each other, and that was kind of what I felt like kept me engaged in the book. I liked how in this story too, the river itself kind of felt like a character because it was such an important part of the story and of the town's history and just everything, and I really thought that that was kind of cool. I felt that the ending was a little bit anticlimactic, but good, because, you know, obviously things get wrapped up nicely, although there were a few little plot points that I wasn't sure about if they were actually solved. One of them was kind of a big one, and so I was kind of I was a little unsure of that, but for the most part it wrapped up nicely and it was an enjoyable read. Overall, I liked it. I didn't like it as much as The Girl on the Train. I just felt like The Girl on the Train was just more intense, was more of a page turner, but this one was also enjoyable and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I finished probably my favorite read of the month of July, and that was Mouse, Volume 1 and 2 by Art Spiegelman. He wrote this about his father's and his mother's experiences during World War II. So it starts with their marriage in the 1930s and then kind of goes all the way until the end of the war and kind of what they went through. And I thought that, first of all, I loved the device he used here with the Jews being mice and the Nazis being cats. First of all, it kind of lessened the brutality of the story because this story is just so heartbreaking, and it's just hard to imagine that people were treated this way. And so it kind of lessened the blow a little bit, at least for me. I liked that he made, you know, the Jews mice and the Nazis cats because of obviously the predatory nature of those two animals together. the Nazis hunting down the Jews, killing the Jews the way they did. Just their kind of, they're just brutality that way. The Jews, obviously, because they were hunted, they were forced into hiding, they were considered the vermin of, that part of the world to a lot of people, and so they were similar to mice. So I just found that to be a really interesting device and metaphor that he used. I loved how, like, a lot of stories about the Holocaust and just the war in general, that the ingenuity that a lot of the people had, things that they had to do to hide each other, creating bunkers in little hiding spots in homes, and finding different ways to make money and to get food and everything, and just the different ways they kind of helped each other. I also loved how this showed kind of the generational gap that exists between I think a lot of people that had parents that lived through World War II and maybe came after, just like he did, that they hear the stories and, they see photographs and stuff, but they still just don't know exactly the hardships that their parents experienced and how those things affected them for the rest of their lives. Because in this book, he definitely has a strained relationship with his father, and there is a lot about his father that he doesn't understand and that he kind of doesn't like. And he knows that it kind of comes from these experiences, and that's part of the reason I think he's trying to write these stories, is because he's trying to make sense of his father and what he went through and how it affected not only his father, but how it kind of also affected him, because even though he wasn't alive yet, he wasn't even thought of, those events shaped him as well, being, the next generation after World War II. Overall, guys, this was a great story. I really, really loved it. The illustrations were good. Like I said, the story was great. It was told very well, and I would highly, highly recommend this if you haven't read it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And I finished out the month of July by reading Bleed by Ed Kurtz, and this was a book that I got in the July Nocturnal Reader's Box. This is a classic horror novel. There's gore, there's cringeworthy moments, it's kind of gross, but it's also very entertaining and very fast-paced. The story is about a guy named Walt who moves into this old kind of farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, and he starts doing repairs on it and stuff because it's really run down, and he discovers this red spot, this like rust-colored spot on the ceiling in the hallway. And a couple times he tries to paint over it and whatnot, and it keeps coming back. And not only that, it keeps getting bigger, and then it starts to kind of seep and like drip blood, and then it kind of starts to talk to him and all this crazy stuff, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Overall, the writing was okay. It wasn't anything to, like rave about, but I think it's a little bit forgivable because the story was, like I said, entertaining and kind of a page turner. I finished this book pretty quickly because I just couldn't put it down. I don't know why. It was just entertaining me, even though it was gross, and I usually don't like gore and blood and stuff, but for some reason it just didn't really seem to bother me in this book. There were a few plot points that did irritate me quite a bit. Basically, reading this book, I learned 2 things. According to this book. One is that if you live out in the middle of nowhere, you can do whatever you want and nobody's gonna know. Nobody's gonna know what you're doing. So there was that, and also that law enforcement is basically non-existent, at least in this story, because there's some stuff that goes down, people that go missing, where you're like, why didn't the police come asking about these missing people? What the heck. It was still an entertaining book. It definitely took a turn that I was not expecting, that was unexpected and gross, but it was there. But overall, like I said, entertaining. If you like horror and that kind of stuff, just classic horror stories, I think you would like this. If you can kind of forgive, like I said, some of the problems with the plot and like I said, a little bit of the weak writing. It's overall a very entertaining book, a quick read, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Alright, so that was my July wrap-up, all the books that I read in the month of July. I had a pretty good reading month. I read a little more than I thought I would, so that's always a good thing. So please let me know in the comments, guys, what did you read this month? What did you like? What did you not like? And if you read any of these books, please let me know what you thought of them. But other than that, that is all I have for today. I hope that you guys are having a wonderful week. And thank you for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!